The European Union is going to enforce the creation of open data markets using regulation. This is going to create incredible opportunities for the industries affected, new businesses, cross-sectoral sharing of information, fair access to data to small companies, but this is also going to create a lot of work. In this talk, I'm going to cover 3 areas. First one, I'm going to give you an overview of the framework of the European Union data framework. I'm going to explain also how everything is around APIs and API management capabilities, and in particular, business-related API management capabilities. And finally, on the third section, I am going to give you an implementation guideline so that companies affected could start the work and planning everything that they have ahead of us. My name is David Vazquez Cortizo. I am Managing Director of Apinity, and thanks for watching. When I move to the agenda, obviously protects the company, the content that I want to deliver. We'll start with an introduction to the EU data access regulation. I will show you who the actors are, how they interact with one another, what they can or cannot do. And then I will move into the technical readiness journey. So let's get into it. This is the castle of the EU data strategy. It consists of a number of horizontal measures. This is supposed to be cross-sectoral regulation. And the EU Data Act is one of these laws that are supposed to be cross-sectoral. And these laws will be followed by sector-specific laws. The only law that I'm aware of, and I have gone through it, is FIDA, which is in a state of draft, probably likely expected to be approved in this year, which means that it will be enacted in 2027. When you read the EU Data Act, it's kind of interesting because you realize that they are targeting the IoT industry, the industry of connected objects, cars, personal devices, wearables, objects, connected objects at the home. And you wonder how can this possibly be a cross-sectoral regulation? And it's only when I read FIDA that I realized that these are twin laws. That when you read the EU Data Act and when you read FIDA for finance, it's practically the same thing. And actually, they are so similar that it's actually the differences between the two that is interesting to highlight. So in this presentation, I will be able to tell you about the EU Data Act and FIDA, and show you also or describe the key differences between the two that I have been able to identify. So if we just jump into it, this is the biggest statement. EU Data Act is a regulation on harmonized rules on fair access to use of data. It is intended to enhance the data economy and foster a competitive data market. In particular, as I said, for the IoT industry. It clarifies who can use it and under which conditions. In particular, the EU Data Act is explaining that we users, we have relationship with companies because we buy products or services from these companies. And out of these products or services that we use, there is data that is being generated. This is not about personal data. This is the data of our products or the data that is produced by the products we buy. And what the EU Data Act is saying is that we users co-own this data, and therefore we can do things with it like making available to other companies, which are third-party companies. One level down, because it's kind of interesting always to see a little bit into the details. So the EU Data Act is split in chapters. Chapter 2 is going to address the relationship of businesses to users, and it's going to tell things like users can pour data that co-generate through the use of a connected product. Chapter 3 is specifically addressing the business-to-business data sharing, and it's explaining in which circumstances a third party, which is in the context of the law called a data user, as opposed to the original company that has always traditionally held the data, which is called data holder. So in which case this data user or third party can actually access the data. And chapter 5 is about business to government, because, and this is something completely new, It is also clearly stated that the public sector bodies will be able to also access this data for certain cases, some of them emergencies, and in particular, they also make it explicit that in case of emergencies, the government agencies will not be paying for the access to the data. In these chapters, we can already see a little bit of difference between the EU Data Act and FIDA. For instance, in Chapter 3, for the EU Data Act and the IoT industry, the regulation says you are not forced to share data with companies that are your direct competition. On the contrary, when you read FIDA, the European Union is saying, I want to increase transparency in the market, I want to increase competition, and therefore, nothing is stopping your competitor to access data directly from you. So it seems that the European Union wants to protect the IoT industry a bit more than it wants to protect the financial industry, or at least really interested in increasing competition. Likewise, another little difference, in FIDA, the financial regulation, there's no reference to any business-to-government data sharing. This is only explicit in the case of the EU Data Act. Now let's see a little bit more a dynamic thing. So we have the users buy products and services from companies. Companies in this context are called data holder because these are the guys who are typically owning the data. There was a discussion there was a presentation in this conference from Porsche that stated that today every car is generating 1 terabyte of data per day. So to make an analogy, my Porsche, my data, I'm the user, I want to be able to use this data, I want to know what I can do with this data. Now, this regulation is creating the concept or a data user. And a data user is somebody who will motivate the user to grant access to the data that he co-owns. And once this access is granted, the data user is going to go fetch data from the data holder. The case north is the case when public authorities are accessing data, which, as I mentioned, is also made explicit in the EU Data Act. And we can consider, by the way, we can consider that there is already an existing or an initial version of FIDA already enacted, which is PSD2, PSD3. In this initial law of open banking, monetization of APIs was forbidden. Banks were forced to expose APIs for free. This is a key difference in the EU Data Act and FIDA, where it is clearly said and encouraged that there is fair monetization for the access to this data and the costs that the data holders are going to incur to make this data available. So it's only in this specific scenario of public authorities accessing data in case of emergency scenarios that it is said for these cases, and only for these cases, monetization will not be considered. It'll be free of charge access. Let's go now into also another view of how this works, starting from a more dynamic, if you wish, what is the workflow? So this starts typically with a data user, a company that wants to offer a cool service to a customer, and we'll tell him, hey, I can do this service for you if you just give me access to the data that you have with your car or your wearable. The customer is going to consider this and make a decision whether or not he or she permits access to data. When the decision is yes, this decision is going to reach the data holder, and following which the data holder is going to authorize the access to data and provide standardized data to the data user, which finally can provide this service that at the beginning of the story he promised the consumer. In the end, if you guys listening, you're familiar with OAuth 2, this magic flow is nothing new. It's just the capability of OAuth 2 and OIDC. So nothing has to be invented. There are redirections within OAuth2 that make all these things work beautifully. Last thing to highlight is that in FIDA, not in the EU Data Act, although in my opinion, this will have to be implemented anyway, but FIDA makes explicit requirement of customer dashboards to be generated and maintained for the financial entities. And in these customer dashboards, a user will be able to see for each of the products that he has, to which companies he has given access to the data. And this will allow users, consumers, to have an active management of these permissions and decide that, hey, I don't want to share my data or the data of my product with this company anymore. And the implementation of these customer dashboards is also a big or a significant difference from the EU Data Act into FIDA. These customer dashboards are mandatory for the financial industry. Okay, so now I'm going to move into the second part of the talk, where I'm going to provide an implementation guide into companies, typically data holders, that need to get ready to expose the data. And there are a few steps. The first one is prepare your system and data. You need to identify which core product data needs to be exposed and prepare the core system for it. I will go into a bit more details. Secondly, this data has to expose via APIs. The access to these APIs have to be secured and has to be at the scale. It'll not be enough anymore that you provide a button, and behind this button there is a nice message that says, send us an email to this address. There are many data users potentially. As I mentioned before, this flow should be automated and controlled by OAuth2. So the access to this API should be automatic and potentially for a large number of consumers. Third point, build customer dashboards. Already mentioned what these are for, and this will require that the data model of companies is expanded. Fourth, verify and upgrade the capabilities of your identity and access management infrastructure. 5, integrate and validate. As there are multiple partners here, there are users, data users, and data holders. There are a number of end-to-end scenarios, and not only the happy path has to be defined and tested, but also multiple error conditions, and this is going to represent effort. And finally, monetization. As I mentioned already, both EU Data Act and FIDA encourage monetization of APIs, which is absolutely great. That's why we can call these opportunities open data markets, and you will have to get ready for it. So what do we mean by get ready your system to expose the data? Well, many companies out there are using legacy systems, monoliths, mainframes, and core systems implemented and running on PL1 software. This is very painful, and typically these systems are not ready or not very friendly when it comes to expose core data over APIs. However, this has to be done. So when you go to the IT teams and you tell them, hey, you will have to expose data APIs into a standard API that is not yet defined, chances are people will push you back and say, hey, we're very busy. When this standard API is defined, come back to us. But this is a very wrong approach, because there's so much preparation work that has to be going into making sure that you can expose this data. How deep is it in your system? Are you ready to do data mapping or support data mapping capabilities? You can create your own proof of concept. You don't need to have a standard ready. Show that you can do some data mapping to show something that is a generic API. And then how close you are, how easy is it for your teams to generate an API from this data, expose this API in a way that can be accessed from the outside in a secure way. The second point is about expanding the data model of the system, because now you need to implement these customer dashboards. Every company has always maintained a database with users. Users have some properties. There are some data that we know about our users. And we also know that each of these users are having one or more products from our company, and their products may have some properties. So there is clearly in the data model of any company, there is a database of users that is linked to a database of products. Now we need to add another dimension, which is now for this customer dashboard, we need to know for this user, for this product, to which companies data access has been granted. So this new dimension into the data model has to be created, and then the application, the dashboard itself, will be built on top of it, and then it will be the actions of revoking access to certain data users that will basically update and allow users to say, okay, now this or that company will no longer be showing up because they have no access to data. I hope that it has been clear. The third thing to highlight and dive a little bit into it is this OAuth2 and IAM system capability. Probably all of the identity and access management systems out there are capable of OAuth2 and OIDC, but these features may not have been activated, and this will be now necessary. In all likelihood, 3-leg tokens, so tokens that will be created by the IAM and that will contain information about the user, about which products of the user are being authorized, and the third part or the third leg of the token is for which company this authorization is valid. So extensive use of OIDC and activation, and probably fine-grained authorization. So it's very likely that now the use of OAuth2 scopes will come into play, or the claims that will be included in the JWT token. And finally, something that I consider important, be careful to generate an audit log to resolve potential litigation issues. You will always want to be able to claim that data was granted to this company because on these days there was an explicit permission granted by the user. As the integration scenarios involve OAuth2, data holder, data user, and user granting permission, this is why I kind of link the identification and support of end-to-end integration scenarios as the next logical step. And finally, API monetization. So this should be the fun part, right? I mean, we have a lot of work, but we can monetize APIs. We can make business decisions. We can also decide how much money we're willing to invest to get data from our competition. Like in most technical decisions, there are 3 basic options. The first one is build the capabilities yourself. Well, here is listed at the last one because definitely I think that this is the worst idea. So let me go back. First, externalize the capability by onboarding your APIs on an API marketplace. Some of these schemas, because at the end, this regulation will be implemented at a national level, and as there are 20 different financial entities that are regulated, the insurance club of Germany will not be mixed with the banking club of Germany or with the asset management club of Germany. So there will be not one, but multiple open data marketplaces by country and by domain, even within finance. So chances are that at least for some of these subsets, for some of these open data marketplaces, there will be a technology, there will be a common API marketplace that is operating the whole thing, and then monetization will be surely handled by this technical component. If that is not the case, which this is how it works in the UK and Germany for PSD2, PSD3, by the way, every bank exposes their own APIs independently, then you should probably choose a vendor that provides monetization capabilities. And last, the worst idea, which is, hey, let's develop this internally. Now, before I go into the closing bit, I would like to finish the presentation with a little bit of uplift, and this is to kind of remind the opportunities that this regulation brings, breaking down silos, allowing different sectors to access data, pay as you drive insurance. The data from your car will be sent and shared with your insurance company, so your insurance can be cheaper for you. New business models, access to data for small, medium enterprises, and then the desired increased transparency and competition in the market. So in summary, what I have covered today is giving you an introduction to the data regulation in the European Union, both on the EU Data Act, which is this cross-sectoral regulation targeting the IoT industry, and its twin, FIDA, which is specifically for the financial industry. I hope it's been made clear how the implementation of this regulation revolves around API readiness, API management, and specifically business-related API management capabilities like monetization. And finally, I hope you have find illustrative and interesting the technical implementation guideline, which includes the preparation of your core system to expose APIs, to securely and at scale, to extend data models for the customer dashboards, to check the capabilities of your identity and access management, and support end-to-end integration scenarios, and finally, to address API monetization. Thank you very much for your attention, and hopefully you have enjoyed the talk.